Okay, so getting into female war, what this does is this wraps up the trilogy known as Earth War. For those of you guys who don't know or who are just now joining us in the whole Aliens comic thing, this comic, or really the Earth War line of stories, so basically Earth Hive, Nightmare Asylum, and this particular video, Female War, these took place before Alien 3. Now the reason why that matters is because of the fact that at the end of Aliens, all we knew about Hicks and Newt and Ripley was that they had gotten into those cryopods on the Sulaco, and they had presumably went back to Earth. And that was it. That's all we had. It was just open-ended after that. And so what these comics did is they came back and said, well, here's what happened after Aliens and all that kind of good stuff. The problem with this was that when Alien 3 came out, as we know, Newt died and Hicks died, and then eventually Ripley died. And so the problem was when this comic came out, there were these continuity errors. How could Ripley and how could Hicks and how could Newt be alive in this comic when they were dead in Alien 3? And so what this comic was designed to do was basically remove them from the equation. It was designed to basically just kind of kick them out. And so they'll actually just sort of go away, and that'll be it. And so it'll be the end comic version of them dying in Alien 3, more or less. I mean, it's not going to be a perfect adaptation, but it is just going to be them kind of, leaving the equation. But something else that I also want to point out here is the idea of Prometheus and Alien Covenant. I just saw Alien Covenant. The movie's amazing. I loved Alien Covenant. It felt like a great blend between like Alien 1 and Prometheus. It felt like it's what Prometheus should have been in a lot of ways. I love Prometheus, thought it was a great movie, but I felt like this was better. And it was a great return to like the alien mythos that I know and love. But the fact remains, back when Alien first came out, when Ridley Scott first made that movie and it first got released, and then it was followed by Aliens 2, which is better than the first one, what we knew, or at least the only thing we knew about the aliens or the xenomorphs, whatever you want to call them, is that somehow or another they were involved in what was called the space jockey. Now, there were all different kinds of ideas and all different kinds of theories that were circling around at the time, and the comics really seemed to hearken to a lot of that, but it was the idea that maybe like the space jockeys made them or something along those lines, but their origins were just never really fleshed out. We never really knew where they came from. With the idea of Prometheus, what they did is they came back and they said there were these beings called the engineers, and in some form or fashion, the engineers created the xenomorphs somewhere along the line, something that we didn't see, and I'm not going to spoil anything for Alien Covenant. But with regards to what was going on there, it was basically just like filling in gaps. It was adding information. And so in a lot of ways, Prometheus and Alien Covenant contradicted information that was in the videos that we've done. They contradicted the comics of Earth Hive, they contradicted the comics of Nightmare Asylum, and they contradicted the comics of this one, Female War. That being said, this really still kind of stands as like an isolated story. We can really just kind of read this in isolation outside of all the Alien films, and it's still interesting. It's still pretty fun. It's still kind of cool. So you guys will get a better idea of what I'm talking about as we get through this. But in the last video in Nightmare Asylum, we had basically picked up with the idea that all hell had broken loose. The Earth was overrun with xenomorphs, and that really just kind of seemed to be the end of that. And so in their attempts to basically find out a way to more or less, purge the Earth of the xenomorphs, Hicks and Newt were met with the arrival of Ellen Ripley. And so what this does is this basically covers what it is that was going on, because in the comics, we never knew what happened to Ellen Ripley. In the comics, it was just Hicks and Newt. It picked up 10 years after Aliens, and we never found out what happened to Ripley. What we end up learning here is that, again, because of the fact that xenomorphs are just kind of running rampant, because of the fact that, the company was still very much invested in learning as much as they could about the xenomorphs and capturing a live specimen, Ripley had essentially gone on a mission with another set of Marines to investigate LV-426, but to also check out the derelict spacecraft, the space jockey ship that was on LV-426. And that's kind of the cool thing, is because it all sort of harkens back. The original Nostromo in Alien, they picked up a beacon coming from a derelict ship. The terraforming base in Aliens was based on the same planet where they picked up the beacon from the first Alien. So it all really kind of harkens back to the same location. But the fact remains here that the idea was to capture a live specimen, do some investigating, see what was going on. But the way the Marines are depicted here is the same way they were depicted exactly in Aliens. They had no idea what they were getting into. At the end of the day, they were just like, oh, it's a bug hunt, it's this, it's that, it's not a huge deal, not a huge problem or anything along those lines. It's just capturing xenomorphs and bringing one back. But the reason why this segment of the story is given to us is because what this does is it basically has Ellen Ripley picking up the entirety of the distress signal that was sent out by the beacon. Because remember, in the first Alien movie, all they did was just pick up on a signal. They didn't know what it was, they couldn't translate it, they couldn't figure it out. They just went down to investigate to see what was going on. What this did is it basically told us that this beacon really seemed to harken back to the idea that there is a singular xenomorph somewhere out there that's basically like the grand poobah. Like it is, we're gonna find out it's actually called the Queen Mother, but it is like the uber alien. And I hate to use that phrase, but it's like the uber xenomorph. But essentially what had happened is somewhere along the line, the xenomorphs have been separated from the Queen Mother, and the idea was that the Queen Mother was always calling them back. And so what Ripley had learned is that previously it was believed that the xenomorphs would just procreate like crazy. I mean, they were just like rabbits. They would just show up on a planet, they would just start procreating, and they would just spread around. It would be like, like plants that pollinate. For example, plants, they basically reproduce by allowing their pollen to be caught in the wind or caught by bees. They're carried to other plants and they just reproduce. And that's it. That seemed to be the case with the xenomorphs, but instead what we learn is that it's actually ordered, it's structured. There is a method to the madness. And the method to this madness is for the Queen Mother to basically recall all of her xenomorphs back to her. Now, why it is she's doing that, we do not entirely know. All we know is that this is just something that's taking place. Now, what we also do is we pick up with this young girl, Amy. Now, remember in the last video, we had talked about how Amy, her father, and maybe one or two other people were one of only several tribes, several groups that had survived on Earth. And they were literally just trying to survive one day to the next. They would never go inside buildings. They would never travel around at night. They were just trying to survive the xenomorph infestation on Earth. And one of the things that they talk about here in this video recording that's basically given to us is this idea that humans are just kind of being whisked away by the queens, or at least by the drones, to be taken to the queens, to be cocooned so that more xenomorphs can be born. But what they're learning is that orders are being given by someone just by virtue of how they're acting, just by virtue of the queens are being a little more brave. The queens are, quote unquote, waiting on something. It's basically this idea that the Earth is being prepped for the arrival of a particular thing. And again, it really seems to be like all this is, kind of hitting back to the idea of the Queen Mother. And so what ends up happening here is Ripley, along with Hicks and Newt, having figured out everything that's going on, realizing that there is essentially this Queen Mother, launch an attempt to get back to the xenomorph home planet. Now, the reason why is because according to Ripley, if they get back to the xenomorph home planet, they can capture the Queen Mother. Because the Queen Mother is presumably the source of xenomorphs, the origin point, the place from which they all came, they can take the Queen Mother back to Earth, they can drop her off in a location, and then in turn, they can just destroy the Queen Mother and all the drones and queens that will gather around her, and then just completely go through and effectively save the Earth. And so that's really the motivation here. That's really the desire here. Now, the way that Ripley's doing this is actually pretty smart. Essentially, what she's done is she has gone through and she's created what looks like xenomorph drones. And these are all held in some sort of a stasis bay. And so the idea is that the Queen Mother will see these drones, believe they're her children, and then run to them in order to basically bond with them and then recall them back, take them back with her to her home base, so to speak. In that moment, Ripley will capture the Queen Mother and then drag her back to Earth. So it's actually a pretty solid plan, and it actually works out, or at least it seems it would work out pretty well. But of course, as we know, this is an alien comic, and things never work out that well. Now, the crazy thing about this is when we get into the nature of how it is the Queen Mother functions and what it is that she does. Remember, the xenomorph homeworld is very clandestine. I mean, we really don't get a whole lot in terms of like the entire makeup of the planet, what it's like, so on and so forth, but it does appear to have effectively been terraformed. And so whenever it is that you were going through and you were watching like Aliens or you were watching Alien, and they would have those weird structures that would be created by xenomorphs, that's the entire planet. The basic fundamental, I guess the genealogy or the basic, core of the planet has been changed. The entire planet is just one giant xenomorph locale, one giant xenomorph planet. And so because of that, this Queen Mother, or at least, as they end up finding out here, this Queen Mother is not surrounded by just your traditional xenomorph drones, not at all. They are these very specialized and massive drones. I mean, they are huge in size, something almost equivalent to the size of a queen, maybe a little bit smaller, but they are huge in terms of their stature. Case in point, basically what ends up happening is Ripley, along with a handful of people, travel out onto the xenomorph homeworld in power loaders. And these drones are about the size of the power loaders. Not only that, they are colossal in strength. They're literally just tearing the power loaders, limb from limb. Now, this is an indication of how strong these things are, because remember, when Ripley fought a queen in the Aliens movie, the power loader was equivalent in strength, more or less. It was hydraulics meets physical strength. Ripley was able to basically hold off the queen and then eventually kind of, jettison her into space. And that was really it. The fact that these, massive drone aliens are basically ripping off the limbs of these machines indicates just how strong they are. Now, of course, what we also end up having is basically this royal jelly that basically basically exists around there. Now, as we talked about in our video where we had run over all these different types of xenomorph, this royal jelly serves the purpose of creating a new queen mother should the existing queen mother die. And so the implication here is that there is only ever one queen mother at a time. It's like a beehive. There's only ever one queen bee at a time. If that queen dies, another will take its place, or another beehive may come in there, kill that existing queen, run all the other bees out, and then take over the hive. But whatever the case may be, there's only ever one queen in any beehive at any particular point in time, and that queen basically kind of runs through everything. So it's almost like this continued expansion of the xenomorph hierarchy, in the sense that you have a queen mother, and then, you know, kind of skipping over a few things here and there, you've got a queen, and then you've got drones. And so because of this, Ellen Ripley officially calls out this queen mother. Now, in truth, what's happening in this story kind of stretches the limits of credulity to a degree. And the reason why is because of the fact that we've seen drones just tear human beings limb from limb. Yet somehow, a lot of these guys are able to stand between, or I guess stand against, these massively oversized drones and still hold their own. But the fact remains, this queen mother is wildly intelligent in terms of what it's capable of. What it basically does is it recalls essentially thousands and thousands of these alien drones to it in order to both overrun Ellen Ripley and her forces, kill them, and then essentially take over the ship. Now, what it would do after that, we don't know, because as far as I'm aware, xenomorphs don't know how to fly ships, and if they did, it'd be terrifying as hell. But this is where I say things begin to stretch a little bit of credulity, is because we have Newt and we have Hicks and a couple of these soldiers taking on these thousands of drones with pulse rifles and holding their own. It really seems to be more of like a circumstance of convenience than anything else, just because of the fact that we've seen stories where a group of Marines are overrun by like 50 drones and they're just totally destroyed, you know, and there's no hope for those Marines to survive. Yet, you know, 5 of them are able to hold their own against thousands of them. But ultimately, this really seems to hit back to the idea of how the drones function in relation to the Queen Mother, in the sense that where Ellen Ripley basically kind of goads the Queen Mother into a rage, the Queen Mother attacks her, goes to bite the arm, and then Ripley kind of drags the Queen Mother back into the ship in its stasis pod. The idea seems to be here that drones will not know how to function without the Queen Mother. You know, it would be like, for example, if you were to take a queen out of a beehive, you know, there would be a state of panic. Well, what do we do? Who gives us our orders? You know, where do we go? We have no idea who's supposed to be doing what and where. It would cause all different kinds of problems. And so because of that, with the Queen Mother basically being taken captive, the xenomorphs are running on whatever orders they have left, which is just attack, you know, these guys who were here. They make their escape, they get back onto the ship, and they take off back to Earth, during which time they blow up, you know, one of the vehicles they left behind, killing all these drones. And then that's basically it. And so making their way back to Earth, again, the ultimate goal here is to bring the Queen Mother back on Earth and drop her off. Now, here's the genius of the plan. Here's the genius of this idea. If they were to grab the Queen Mother and they were to drop her off on Earth and they were to just then blow it up, they would kill the Queen Mother and that would be it. The question would have to be asked, if the Queen Mother is killed, regardless of where she is in the universe, then when is a new Queen Mother going to crop up? What steps are taken in order to lead to the birth of a new Queen Mother? Now, it probably wouldn't happen immediately. It would probably take time, but a new Queen Mother would emerge, whether it's several generations down the line or whether it's an immediate process, a queen just kind of starts molting and then turns into a Queen Mother. Regardless, another one would take that Queen Mother's place. And so the goal is to basically grab the Queen Mother and drop her off on Earth and then let it sit there for about 6 months. And the reason why is because what would happen is all these drones from across the world would begin gathering into a singular location, after which they can just stockpile nukes and then just drop a ton of them onto the Queen Mother and all those xenomorphs and wipe them all out. Now, in truth, it would make the Earth virtually uninhabitable for probably 1,000 years, to be honest, just because of the nuclear radiation or the nuclear winter and all that kind of stuff. But small price to pay to make the Earth habitable again. So because of that, the cool thing about this is that for the character of Newt, she's still stuck in the idea that this little girl, Amy, needs to be saved. Now, the reason why this matters is because of the fact that Amy is to Newt what Newt was to Ripley. Remember, in the Aliens movie, Ripley had basically found Newt, and Ripley had essentially outlived her daughter. You know, at the end of Alien, she was just kind of in cryostasis, floating in space for 45 years or something like that. When they thawed her out and woke her up, they told her, hey, look, your daughter's like 60-something years old. You know, with regards to Newt, she was like, you know, a surrogate daughter for Ellen Ripley. It was like, you know, Ellen Ripley basically being able to take care of her daughter when she wasn't, while she was floating out in space. For the character of Newt, this little girl, Amy, and her father, who were on this planet trying to survive day by day, is like a girl that she can save. For Newt, it's like if she saves Amy, then she's able to do at least something that matters. She's able to save someone from this horrendous experience, not to mention that with the entirety of this xenomorph population expected to be nuked, Amy would have no chance of surviving anyway. And so what actually ends up happening here is Newt works directly against Ellen Ripley. She actually sabotages the mission to a degree, in the sense that while she doesn't like detonate the ship early or anything along those lines, she actually grabs the shuttle and takes off down to Earth. Now, at this point, it's really just Ripley saying, okay, look, we got to postpone things just because of the fact that I'm not going to let Newt die. I mean, it's just not going to be that way. And it makes sense because Newt is a daughter to Ripley in a lot of different ways. They've been through a lot together. You know, Newt was saved by Ripley. It makes sense that Ripley would go after her and try to save her life. But what ultimately ends up happening here is Ripley, where she considers Newt to be a fool, where she considers her to kind of be stupid for what it is that she's doing, we ultimately end up learning that the reason why is, of course, Newt's trying to save this little girl, Amy. And it changes the way Ripley views what it is that Newt is doing. It actually allows her to sympathize with Newt to a degree. And so because of this, with the Queen Mother also being dropped off and engineering her escape, Ripley just kind of shoots the Queen Mother up, you know, or at least tries to hold her off as best she can. But one of the things that's established here is that the Queen Mother can communicate with drones no matter where she is, and all drones will listen. It's like a built-in thing. You know, it's something that they inherently understand. As soon as a Queen Mother arrives, queens listen to the Queen Mother, drones listen to the Queen Mother. Everybody follows her commands, no questions asked. So it's very animal instinct in that capacity. And that's what makes it kind of cool. Like, you know, the Queen Mother shows up and all the drones just immediately start following her orders. All the queens immediately start following her orders, no questions asked. And that's really all there is to it. And so of course, what this does is it leads to a direct conflict again, you know, with Ripley and with Newt and all these different xenomorphs. And this is when things again begin to kind of stretch the limits of credulity, because now it's somehow Ellen Ripley and Hicks really kind of standing against just like these thousands of drones and this Queen Mother. But in the end, it's really more of just an attempt to get out with their lives. At this point, it's not even really about like trying to eradicate what's left of the infestation. It's just, let's get out of here and let's call it a day. And that's exactly what happens. I mean, they get in their little escape pod, you know, they jettison out of the place, they get back to their ship, and they head towards Gateway Station. Now, of course, again, Gateway Station is basically just a space station that sits outside of the Earth, and it's filled with what's left of humanity, those individuals who were lucky enough to escape the Earth during the initial stages of the xenomorph infestation. And so again, this really kind of begins to wrap up this trilogy, and it leaves a lot of things open-ended just because of the fact that there just wasn't enough time to wrap it all up. Instead, what we end up finding out here, at least from what Newt tells us, and again, this is left a little bit ambiguous in terms of how it is that she knows it. She really just kind of insinuates the idea that it came by way of dreams. But what we're basically told here is that all of this had been basically planned out by a space jockey, that somewhere along the line, a space jockey had survived, or a space jockey had witnessed everything that was going on, and it set this entire thing in motion. Now, the space jockey did not set like the colonization of Earth by the xenomorphs in motion. It didn't have anything involved in that, but the idea of the space jockey was to basically terraform the Earth. We don't know why, we just know that was its motivation. And so what ended up happening is through, you know, whether it seemed to be, you know, telepathic in some form or fashion, but regardless, the space jockey was the reason why Ellen Ripley and these Marines had traveled back to LV-426 and stumbled across the signal that was picked up by this Nostromo, deciphered the entirety of the signal, and learned about the Queen Mother, knowing that once Ellen Ripley had the location of the Queen Mother, that she would capture it and all the events of this comic would take place. Essentially, what would happen is that Ellen Ripley and what was left of humanity would effectively rid the Earth of the alien infestation for the space jockey, who in turn would go back and just terraform the Earth, just effectively take over the entirety of the planet. Because at this point, there's really no one left alive. There really are no survivors on Earth, at least not that I'm aware of. There is a one-shot that follows this that basically deals with like what happens when the space jockey shows up on Earth, but it's not very good. And even then, it basically contradicts everything going on in the realm of continuity. I mean, we might cover it, you know, just for the sake of having it, but it contradicts a lot of information that's here. You know, for example, like the ship actually lands on Earth, so on and so forth. But for the most part, virtually everybody, every single person, every single human being on Earth is gone. If they didn't escape, you know, they're on Gateway Station, but everybody who stayed on Earth is dead. The fact remains here that this really kind of wraps things up, because again, this story was designed for the purpose of essentially just removing Hicks and Newt and Ripley from the Alien comics in order to more or less fall in line with the idea that they're gone in the Alien film. films, at least, you know, Ripley as a human, as well as Hicks and Newt. And so what ends up happening is once they basically escape the Earth, they travel to Gateway Station, presumably kind of live out their lives there. That seems to be the implication. And that's really it. I mean, we never really see or hear from them again. That's really all there is to it. Their characters are just kind of gone from the equation. But following this, we start getting into things like Alien Genocide, and they're really just kind of like standalone stories for the most part. As far as I'm aware, there really isn't a whole lot of like continuity. It's just things like Alien Genocide, for example, is like the Xenomorph Civil War, where we learn that there are different like types, like two main types of Xenomorphs, the red and the black ones, and they just fight amongst themselves. We just learn, you know, different things like Alien Harvest, Colonial Marines. We just get a lot of these really cool standalone stories with regards to the alien landscape. But anyway, guys, if you are new here to Comics Explained, make sure you guys hit the sub button to become part of the Rob Corps. If you guys enjoyed this video, make sure you drop a like, and I will catch you all later. Peace.